12. Genesis chapter 12. We're going to jump right into it. I hope we have enough time to cover two different occurrences of Jesus being found in the Old Testament, but we're certainly going to get through one. So the first one is Genesis 12, 1. And if you get there, say, I'm there.
I'm there.
Okay. Lisa, will you go ahead and read Genesis 12, verse 1?
Sure. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which that I will show you.
Now the Lord said to Abram, ... Okay? We have God speaking to somebody else now. The previous person he spoke to was Noah. Okay? Now he's speaking to Abram. He calls Abram out of the land. He's going to move him into the promised land. That is the land that I will show you. Here's a question for the group. Okay? In Genesis 12, verse 1, we find the Lord. And the Lord is Yahweh. I want to say this. Yeah, Yahweh.
When it's all capitalized.
It's all capitalized because in Jewish tradition, they didn't add consonants. You're not allowed to spell the name of God. To this day, I have Jewish friends that spell God this way. G-D. They're so afraid of mispronouncing the holy name of God, they're so afraid of misspelling the name of God, that they do that so that they won't be judged by God.
Okay? If you're taking part of a sermon, you know that.
Right, yeah. Yahweh. So I'm going to have everybody practice something, okay? I want us to breathe in and breathe out, okay? So when you breathe in, make the sound, and then breathe it out. That is how you say the name of God. The holy name of God is a breath in and a breath out.
That's life.
That is life. That is God breathing in and breathing into Adam, the dust of the earth, right? Breathing life into him, right?
Wow.
So that is Yahweh. That's how you actually say the name of God. Now you can call him Jehovah. You can call him Yahweh. You can call him Yahweh. There's a number of pronunciations depending on dialects, and they're not wrong. It's just a way of, but to the Jews, they do not put consonants because they don't want to be accused of mispronouncing or misspelling the name of God. But the name of God is an inward breath and an outward breath. I mean, the way that sounds is how you would say the name of God. But will this name Lord, will the same Lord that revealed himself to Abram here, okay, will he later reveal himself to Jesus? Will this Lord reveal himself to Abram later in some form other than a voice? That's the question I'm going to ask. Will this Lord, who's only speaking right here, he's not standing in front of Abram, he's just speaking to him, voice from heaven, let's say it that way. Will this same Lord who is speaking to Abram later reveal himself to Abram in some form other than just a voice from heaven?
I think I've got an idea.
Okay, that's the question that I want us to ponder tonight. Okay, because Jesus, and I'm not going to say right now whether or not he did, but here's what I want us to find about Jesus. Mark yourself in Genesis 12. We'll come back to Genesis here a little bit later. Put a ribbon there. Now turn to John 8, verse 56. John 8, verse 56. Matter of fact, we'll read through 59, 56, 57, 58, 59. Okay? John 8, 56 through 59. And John, since it's John, I'm going to have John read it. John 8, 56 through 59. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Then they took up stones and threw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them.
Look what's being said here, okay? He's speaking to a group of Jews. These Jews were counting their father as Abraham as if that made them approved by God. Our father is Abraham. We're the Jewish people. That is who we revere, okay? And so Jesus came back at him and said, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. What's that mean? He rejoiced to see my day. And not only did he see it, okay, he saw it and was glad. Or some translations rejoiced and glad, right? Your father Abraham rejoiced when he saw my day. He saw it and was glad. What's that all about? You know what that's about? Any guesses?
He's announcing who he is.
He's announcing, Jesus is, number one, he's doing a few things here. He's announcing who he is to the Jews, okay? But he's doing it in such a way. See, look at the order that they put. See, Jesus said, your father Abraham saw me. Look how they responded in verse 57. So the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50, and you have seen Abraham? See how they reverse the order?
Right.
Jesus just said, Abraham saw me, and they said, are you telling us you saw Abraham? No, that's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you he saw me, or saw my day. We're trying to figure out what that looks like. What does it mean to see the day of Jesus? Okay? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, in the Greek it's ego eimi, which is I am the great I am, and the Hebrew is, okay? Why did they pick up stones to throw at him?
Because they were thinking it was heresy?
They thought it was blasphemy. Exactly. What specifically was blasphemous?
He was calling himself God.
Thank you. To the skeptics and scoffers of the world who will always say you won't believe the number of YouTube videos, I'm sure you see them too, where people say, well, you know, Jesus never said he was God. Okay, what did he just say here? Before Abraham was Yahweh, I am. Okay? And the Jews knew that Yahweh was an eternally existent being. There's only one eternally existent being, and we call him God.
Where is it? I can't remember the verse right now, where he says, I and my Father are one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can you deny it unless you throw that verse out?
Right? John 14.
John 14.
Yeah. I and my Father are one. We're of the same accord. We think of the same accord.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's no decision that Jesus makes apart from the will of the Father. Right? So I want to look at this and say, okay, Abraham saw the day of Jesus. He rejoiced in it and he was glad. What is this idea of seeing the day of Jesus? Guesses. I'm asking everybody, what do you think this means?
I think it was when he went up there and ready to sacrifice his son. And Jesus, I mean, that's a picture of what Jesus did for us.
Yeah.
He's willing to give away his own son, or Abraham was.
Here's Abraham over here. Okay, stick figure Abraham. Okay.
I recognize him.
Okay. And he sees the day of Jesus. Okay. But Jesus.
Right.
Is that what we're saying? Mm-hmm. So he somehow sees that. As if he's looking through some, you know, like if you've ever seen the movie Stargate, you know, where,
right.
you know, you can kind of look through this portal opens up, and you're taken to the future where you can see the future through this portal of some sort. And Abraham was allowed to see this, and he was glad.
You know, the amazing thing about that was, when he was taking Isaac up there, he knew God was going to spare his son. As you said, we will come back down and told you guys with him.
Get ahead of ourselves. Get ahead of ourselves. Okay? We're on to it. We're on to it. Okay? But the question I'm asking is, how did Abraham, or Abram still at this point, Abram is a name that means mighty father. Abraham, you add that extra breath, it means father of many nations. Okay? He's still Abram at this point. Okay? How did Abram know to be glad when he saw the day of Jesus? That's a question we never ask and answer. How did he know to be glad? I don't know about you, Janetta, but if I was just standing out in my yard, all of a sudden, and this portal opens up, and I see this guy dying on a cross, I'm not going to be glad about that. I might be horrified by that. Mm-hmm. So how did Abram know to rejoice and be glad when he saw this? That's the question. I want to hold that thought, because I know we got many answers, and I'm sure they're correct, right? But here's the question we need to answer, okay? What exactly did Abraham see? Was he expecting to see something in his lifetime? Did he have some promise that was given to him before all of this? Well, Genesis 12:1 is the first time he's talked to the Lord or heard the Lord speak to him, okay? Was he aware of some promise before him? Here's what I want to write up on the board. This is something we often don't think about, okay? I'm going to talk about the patriarchs. I'm going to talk about those patriarchs that lived before the flood, and I'm going to talk about the patriarchs that lived after the flood, those who lived after the flood, okay? So I guess you could say that the antediluvian, that means before the flood, okay? Let's look at Adam. Adam lived to be 930 years old. That's not metaphor, that's not figurative, that's literal. He lived 930 years, okay? Well over 10 times the average now, okay? About 15 times the average. How could that happen? How can somebody live for so many years? He's the first one, he's the perfect one, right? He had a perfect body at his creation, but eventually his sin caused him to eventually die at the age of 930. The genealogy then goes to Seth. Okay? Abel was killed by Cain. Cain was banished. Seth was the next in the godly line. He lived to be 912. Seth had a son, Enosh. Enosh lived to be 905. This is crazy. Enosh had Canaan. And Canaan lived to be 910. Canaan had Mahalalel. He lived to be 895. He had Jared. Jared lived to be 962, even longer than Adam. Okay? Jared had Enoch. What happened with Enoch?
He ascended.
He ascended. He was raptured. He lived 365, never died, was raptured. This is very important right here. Very important to know. His son, one of them at least, Methuselah. Methuselah, okay? Who lived 969 years, the oldest man in recorded history, okay? Methuselah had Lamech. He had the trinity of holy numbers, 777. He's the son of Methuselah, father of Noah. And then Noah lived to be 950 years. Let's think about this for a second, okay? Because we don't often think about this, okay? Did Seth know his father Adam?
Yes.
Knew him, okay? What is the job of the father? With the son, with the children?
To teach.
To teach. That's the number one priority in the family. Teach, be the spiritual guide, bounce the baby on the knee. Okay, here's the next question. Did Enosh know his grandfather?
Should have.
Should have, based on that age. Did Kenan know his great-grandfather? Yes, Adam was still alive. Did Mahalalel know Adam? Yes. Did Jared know Adam? Yes. Did Enoch know Adam? Yes. Did Methuselah know Adam? Yes. Did Lamech know Adam? Yes. All of these men were bounced on the knee of Adam and taught by Adam. But did Noah know Adam?
No.
No. Adam died before Noah was born. That's kind of important, okay? All of these patriarchs knew Adam. We sometimes take delight, and Janetta does this, where you take a family picture and it's multiple generations, right? If you can live to be a great-great-grandparent, that's saying something about your longevity. And if you live long enough to be able to be bounced on the knee of that family member, that ancestor, while they're still alive, right? Obviously, they won't be bounced on the knee of a dead person, but while they're alive, and you've been able to have their knowledge imparted to you, right? This is how we do it even today. If some kid is told to write a report on their family genealogy for school, and they go to their parents, and you've had this, right? Daniel, go ask you at school? Or they have at one point in elementary school, tell us your genealogy and whatever.
I don't think we ever did that.
You're going to go home and you're going to ask your parents about your genealogy. And your parents will probably say, go ask Grandma, go ask Grandpa. And if Grandpa's, and so it may be Grandpa will say, you know what? My dad's still alive, your great-grandpa. Go ask great-grandpa. Here's the question. If Lamech had a question of his father, and his father might say, go ask Enoch, go ask Jared, go ask Mahalalel. Well, Enoch, was only around for so long, but go ask Adam. Adam is still alive, living somewhere nearby. They'd make a trek and go see him. We don't know about Eve, but we know Adam lived a good long life. And we also have to remember that back in this time, there was what we call an oral tradition. Everything was passed down to the next generation orally, okay?
And this was before the law.
Before the law, right? So, what's the point I'm making here, okay? Seth knew what Adam knew. Enosh knew what Adam knew. Everybody knew what Adam knew because they were able to talk to Adam face to face. Okay? So, let's go to the next generation. Okay? Let's talk about Noah and his 3 sons. Shem, Ham, Japheth. And by the way, Japheth was probably the older and Shem was the middle child, but they always put the most important one first. Shem was the most important because his name, Semite, that's where the Semitic tribes came from, and that's where the Jews came from. They came from that line. The Japhethites were more European, Russian, European, and the Hamites moved into Africa, into that region. Okay? So let's look at the descendants of Shem. Shem lived to be 600 years old. He lived before the flood and after the flood. Okay?
Does he have gills or something?
Huh?
Does he have gills or something? How did he survive the flood?
On the ark.
Oh.
Yeah, remember he took a family.
He's the son of Noah. Noah took his 3 sons, their 3 wives, and his wife. That's 8 people with Noah. Noah, his wife, 3 sons and their wives. 8 people.
Okay.
And all the
I thought it
animals.
was only Noah and his family, not so on and so forth.
Yeah, his son was Shem. Noah's son is Shem.
Yeah.
He has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
What, did
So-
any of his sons have kids? You
Yeah.
said there were 8 people.
You're
I
here
didn't
because
know
they
were-
did.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
You're
know.
here because they did.
I didn't know all that.
Right? Your ancestor is one of these 3 men.
Wouldn't that make us some bread?
We're all
I think
inbred. We're all inbred. We're all cousins. We all come from Adam eventually, but we all come from these. I know that I come from Shem. I've had the guy that works for Answers in Genesis down in Kentucky with the Ark and stuff. He did a deep dive and he said, you come from the line of Shem. Your paternal line comes through Shem. He can read it back that far.
That is.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Why
Okay.
how does he know that? Is that just the Americans in general, or?
No. It's a deep dive DNA. I sent him my DNA profile.
Oh, for you specifically.
Yeah, for me specifically, and he can do very
Oh,
deep dives. Yeah.
Very
son's name
interesting.
Ham?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not, well, I could be related to all three of them, but paternally, my dad's dad goes all the way back to Shem. Through one of his grandchildren, Joktan, I actually descend through.
What are these names?
Yeah. Well, they're not.
Japheth.
Japheth, yeah. Shem.
Well, you're going to remember that.
Daniel.
What kind of name is that?
Jeez. David Joseph. That's my name. Hey, where that name? Daniel. Where that name come from, right?
I don't know anybody named Japheth. You know,
Go to another
I'm
country.
trying to name my kid Japheth.
Go to another country. Go to another
Yeah.
country.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, back to what we're talking about.
Shot? Okay.
All of these descendants of Adam, except for Noah, had the opportunity to speak to Adam. Hold on to that thought for a second, because he lived such a long time and he overlapped their lives. Shem was one son of Noah that we're going to spotlight right now, as we should. He lived 600 years. He had a son, Arpachshad. Yeah, we don't have anybody named Arpachshad today. 438 years he lived after the flood. He didn't live before the flood. He was actually born 2 years after the flood. Arpachshad had a son named Shelah. He lived to be 433. Shelah had Eber, might be a familiar name because the word Hebrew comes from that word. 464 years. Then there was Peleg, Eber's son, lived 239 years. What's going on here?
They're
We see a
decreasing
decrease in life expectancies.
Right.
Why?
because the earth has
Because the earth has become hostile compared to what it was before the flood.
Yeah.
The different DNA structure, mutations in the DNA, the fact that they were eating meat now, probably cholesterol and heart disease. Still 239, I'd take that. His son Reu also lived to be 239.
Didn't the atmosphere
And then you had their son Serug. Here's the big thing. It's coming up here. Hold on. Serug lived to be 230. Come up here now. Nahor, this is Abraham's grandfather, lived to be 148. Terah, Abraham's father, lived to be 205. Abram himself, Abraham, lived to be 175. So drastically shorter life expectancies after the flood because of the hostility of the earth, their diet, mutations in DNA, the bottleneck that occurred in the gene pool at the ark and whatever. Okay, let's go in reverse order. Did Arpachshad know his father Shem?
Yeah.
Yes. Did Shelah know his grandfather? He lived 600 years. Remember? Yes. Did Eber know Shem? Did Peleg know Shem? Did Reu know Shem? Reu and Serug know Shem?
I bet this is how English
Did Nahor know Shem? Did Terah know Shem? Yes. These are 10 names. These are 10 names. Okay. Here's the million-dollar question. Did Abraham know Shem? Yes.
He did?
Abraham's life intersected with Shem's life by about 150 years.
How old did Abraham live?
175 years. All of these men who were descendants of Shem knew Shem. Okay? Now, what makes this so important? This is the big so what question here. Okay? What's the point? I said the ancients lived with an oral tradition. Okay? Let's talk about 4 men. Abraham, right over here. Abraham knew Shem. By the way, Shem lived on the other side of the flood. He knew what life was like before the flood. Abraham, by the way, Abraham was 2,000 years before Jesus. Adam was 2,000 years before Abraham. Hold on a second, Dan, let me get this point. Shem knew, let's just pick one of these 2 names here, Lamech and Methuselah. Let's choose Methuselah. Oldest man ever. And Methuselah knew
Adam.
4 men transpiring 2,000 years.
And 7
Knew each other.
generations.
And 20 generations, right?
No, I wrote down each one 17.
1, 2,
Yeah, it's a
3,
guess.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Then I missed something. So.
Yeah. 20. And you find this all in Genesis. Everything's there from like Genesis 14 on for all this. Okay? What's the point here? Abraham knew Shem. Shem knew Methuselah. Methuselah knew Abraham. This is a span of 2,000 years. Okay? Now, 2 points I want to make from this, and we'll move on with the time we have left. There are people who will say that the biblical tradition has been corrupted because of the number of years that has passed by.
Kenneth Copeland.
Kenneth Copeland is just
He also spreads.
he's a blasphemous heretic, is what. We won't even bring up his name in here.
I
He's just a joke.
analyzed that interview
Right.
I did with Inside Edition.
He's just got a
Don't
demon.
you
Anyway, 4 men, he knew him, he knew him, he knew him, over 200 years lends to no corruption in the oral tradition. In other words, Abraham learned faithfully from Shem. Shem told him the truth of what he knew. Methuselah told Shem the truth about what he knew. And Adam told Methuselah the truth of what he knew. Okay? Very little chance for corruption in the oral tradition. Okay? Now, we're going to take all this back to Abram being glad about what he saw. What did Abram expect to see? What did Abram expect to see? And by the way, if you could talk to Adam, what kind of questions would you ask him?
Why are we here?
Why we're here? Is that what you said? Well, he knew his wife Eve. That's why we're here, okay? That's why all of us are here. Yada yada. Yada yada, that's a Hebrew word, not yada yada for no intimate. Okay?
Wait, what? That yada is a word?
Yada yada is a Hebrew word. Yada means to intimately know. That means have relations.
Oh.
So when somebody says yada yada yada, whatever.
So
it's a
when
joke.
somebody says you know them in the biblical sense, is that what they're talking
That's
about?
yada. That's a Hebrew word. Yada.
Also, the question.
All right. If Mahalalel had a chance to sit on Adam's lap, if Methuselah and Lamech had a chance to sit on Adam's lap, what kinds of questions do you think they're going to ask him? Come on now, who's
We're going to
Adam?
ask him
Where's
about
the
God because Adam knew God.
Adam actually walked with God in the garden. Okay? Tell us about the garden, Adam.
Where's that?
Tell us about the garden. Nobody's ever going to find the garden. It's hidden. It's going to be with swords, right? Tell me, Adam, about walking with God. Tell me about the perfection of creation. Tell me how you named the animals, right? Tell me about Eve. Tell me about my great-great-great-grandmother, right? What was that relationship like? Tell me about how God sacrificed your pets to make you skins when you realized you were naked. How'd that make you feel? Tell us about the fall. Okay? I know you don't like to talk about that, but I need to know. Tell me everything about the fall. What led to it, right? How do we know? How do we know today about the fall unless it was faithfully passed down by word of mouth between 4 men over 2,000 years? Oral tradition, right? Tell me, in spite of the fall, tell me about the promise that God made to you despite the fall. Somebody turn to Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Does the Bible disprove that there being a supercontinent at one point? Like
No, I mean that's Pangea.
Do you think
When the worldwide flood happened and the water was over the face of the earth, the continents were shifting underneath.
See, that's
Volcanic
why I asked
activity.
you, because I wanted to see what you thought about that. Because I've been watching all of these videos here recently because I'll watch them before I go to bed.
An evolutionist will say continental drift has happened over a period of millions and billions of years, but Biblical creationists will say it happened at the time of the flood. Okay, Lisa, read Genesis 3:15.
And I will put an enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel.
The proto-evangelium. Remember we talked about that last week? The first gospel. After Adam fell and after God condemned Satan just one verse before, he then turns his attention to Eve, and then he gives a promise to Adam and Eve, and here it is. There's going to be enmity, hostility between you and the woman. He's still talking to Satan. Between you and the woman, there's going to be hostility. Between those who follow you and those who come from her seed. Her seed. Women don't have seed. Only men have seed. So when you read her seed, who's in view here?
Jesus.
Jesus. This is the first gospel. He, Jesus, will bruise you, Satan, on the head, deal you a deadly blow. You will merely bruise him on the heel. You'll strike his heel. You'll get him up on a cross through wicked men. But once he says it is finished and bows his head, your head will be crushed, Satan. This is the first mention of the gospel. This is the promise. Adam told that promise to everybody that he bounced on his knee and other things. Methuselah passed that on and told it to Shem. Exactly the way that he was told by Adam. Exactly. And then Shem told it to Abraham. Exactly how Adam said to Methuselah, Methuselah said to Shem, Shem said to Abraham. Do we see what's going on here? This promise was repeated over and over and over again through the generations. So now we've answered our question, right? Why does Abram look through the portal to the future, see this, and rejoice? Why does he do that?
Yeah.
Because he knew the promise.
And
The promise was...
And he believed God.
He believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness.
Right.
He believed God and it was credited to him as righteous. What did Abraham know when he finally saw all of this and all these things were revealed to him? The fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. He saw that and he's like, I don't have to work toward being right in the eyes of God. I don't have to even follow a law to be right in the eyes of God, because Abraham lived before the law. And even if you lived at the time of the law doesn't save you, right? But still, I just need to believe God in his word. Mm-hmm. And he saw Jesus. Somehow saw Jesus. Now, how did he see Jesus?
Are you saying he saw Jesus through the history of the oral tradition?
He saw him first through the promise that was passed down from Adam to his descendants before him, faithfully, Genesis 3:15. And he also saw two separate situations in the Old Testament where I believe we can find Jesus in the Old Testament. So now we're going to turn to Genesis 14, beginning in verse 17. All this making sense? Right? Mm-hmm. A faithful, this isn't a telephone game. See, this is what a skeptic will say, oh, you can't trust the Bible because the Bible's just a telephone game. You know, you all get in a circle as kids and one person tells one person, whispering near the other. By the time it gets around, the story's all corrupted and messed up. This disallows that. See what I'm saying? Genesis 3:15, the promise made to Adam was passed down faithfully to Abraham. And when he finally saw certain aspects of Jesus off in the future, he rejoiced in it and was glad. Margaret, can you read beginning of verse 17 through 20?
All right. And the king Solomon went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of, I don't know that.
Kedorlaomer.
Okay, you said it.
Kedorlaomer.
And of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shavia,
Shaveh.
which is the king's dale. And
Melchizedek.
okay, King Salem brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth.
Verse 20.
What is that?
14.
Chapter 14, yeah, verse 20. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. He gave him a tenth of all. Okay? He, Abram, gave Melchizedek a tenth, a tithe of everything he had. And Abraham was a wealthy man. Abram was a wealthy man. This is the question I want to ask and answer. Was Melchizedek a Christophany, which means an Old Testament appearance of Christ? Was that Melchizedek? Was Melchizedek a Christophany, an Old Testament appearance of Jesus?
Who came up with that word?
That's the
It
question.
actually makes sense with the bread and the wine. He fed the 1,000, and then the wine he made at the wedding.
Who was Melchizedek? Let's look at the Bible. There's 3 passages. You got Hebrews, the Psalms, and also here in Genesis that talk about Melchizedek. Otherwise, he's a fairly mysterious character. Okay? He was a king of Salem. Salem comes from the Hebrew word shalom. That means peace. The city of peace is Jerusalem. Jewish Salem, right? Jerusalem, right? Okay? Salem means shalom. So he's a king of peace or a prince of peace. Okay? Jesus was a king. King of kings, Lord of lords. Okay? Is a king, I should say, not was. He was a priest of God Most High. But he was not a Levitical priest. He was not an Aaronic priest, like coming from the lineage of Aaron or from the Levites. He was his own priest. I mean, he was just... Some people, the other argument, will argue that Shem was Melchizedek. I think there's less evidence for that. Just because he lived at the same time, and just because he was alive during this time, doesn't necessarily mean he's the high priest by default. Okay? So he was king of Salem. Okay? Who's ultimately the king of Jerusalem?
Jesus.
Jesus. He was a priest of God Most High. Jesus is also king and priest, right? Remember the 3 gifts given at his birth. Gold for a king, incense for a priest, frankincense for a prophet. Okay? Number 3, he gave Abram bread and wine. That sounds to me like communion. Let me read from John 6. I'll read it. You don't have to turn there, but if you want to write this down. John 6, starting at verse 53. So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, and by the way, this is something the Catholics grossly distort. Okay? Jesus is talking symbolically here. We know this because he was speaking symbolically earlier about being the bread of life, okay? Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, sounds like vampirism, right? But he's speaking symbolically. He's not speaking literally. You have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread which came down out of heaven, not as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. Of course, he's speaking symbolically. He's not talking about literally eating his flesh off the bone and drinking his blood, literally. He's speaking symbolically. Do we commemorate this symbolism?
Yes.
Every quarter we have communion service, right? Where we have, what do we have?
Bread and wine.
Bread and wine. Not wine, but we have wafer and grape juice, okay? We just have a substitute for that.
Wine can be true expensive.
We give that, but look who gave it to who? Melchizedek gave it to Abram, right? And Abram had communion with Melchizedek. Interesting, okay? Not only that, but when we contribute to the church financially, what do we often call that? Gifts and tithes, tithes and offerings, whatever. We're not bound by the tithe, but in the Old Testament, there was a system of tithing. Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. Why would he give Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had? Why would he do that? Without question, right? If we look at Leviticus 27, verses 30 and 32, you can just write it down, you don't have to turn there. Leviticus 27, verses 30 and 32. Thus all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. The tithe is the Lord's. Verse 32, it's holy to the Lord. For every 10th part of herd or flock, whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. In other words, the tithe belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. And here we have a foreshadowing. Maybe it's just a type. Maybe Melchizedek was a man, literally a man, and not actually Jesus in Christophanic form, as some kind of form of Christophany before he actually appeared on earth in the flesh. If that doesn't convince us that Melchizedek is actually Jesus in a Christophany form, let's look at Psalm 110, verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. You're speaking about the Messiah. You are a priest forever, not according to the Levitical priesthood. Jesus didn't come through that line. He was from the tribe of Judah. Not through Aaron's line, but through, in the sense of Melchizedek, this mysterious Old Testament character. Okay? He's speaking of the Messiah. David is writing not of himself, but of the Messiah. Okay? We get another clue in Hebrews 7, verses 1 through 3. So the author of Hebrews, whether that be Paul or somebody else, we don't know who wrote Hebrews, but look what he wrote here. Hebrews 7, 1 through 3. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham apportioned a tenth part of all the spoils, was first of all, by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness. That's what Melchizedek means. And then also King of Salem, which means King of Peace. So not only is Melchizedek King of Righteousness, he's King of Peace. He is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. That means he's eternal, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. That's what the author of Hebrews says.
Was he the son of Enoch?
Was he what?
Was he in the lineage over there?
No, Melchizedek is not part of this lineage.
Oh, that was Methuselah.
Yeah, that's Methuselah. Yeah.
All right.
Melchizedek is just this mysterious king who just shows up with the king of Sodom standing there, and then all of a sudden Abraham turns his attention to him like, he's the king of righteousness, he's the king of peace. Who is this guy? Well, it's purposely veiled in Scripture. We can't dogmatically say that it was Jesus in Christophanic form, some sort of pre-birth, appearance in the Old Testament. We can't necessarily say that, okay? But when we say that Abraham saw the days of Jesus, he saw my day, he rejoiced at my day, could it be that that was the beginning of it? That when he met Melchizedek, he began seeing sort of this foreshadowing of who this Jesus was. Okay, I'm going to have communion with this King of Peace and King of Righteousness. I'm going to give him a tenth of everything I have, right? I mean, he is somebody that is able to bless and be blessed, right? So if that doesn't specifically tell us, it at least points to the coming Jesus. It at least points to something about Jesus that Abraham was able to experience. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But I do want us to turn to Genesis 22 now. And we'll close out our remaining time with this. And we're just going to read it, and I'm just going to focus on some points here. And you can underline these points in your Bible, highlight, mark it up. If you've got highlighters that you can use in your Bible, whatever. Okay? Maybe here Jesus gave Abram a look at the cross. Okay? Melchizedek thing was just a warm-up. This is the actual, he saw my days and was glad. Okay, let's look at Genesis 22, 1 through 14. I'll read, and then I'll stop along the way for a few things. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. So again, God is speaking to Abraham, just like in Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abraham. So the Lord is still speaking to him. He said, verse 2, take now your son, your only son. Is that a true statement?
No.
It's not, is it?
No.
I think God knows what he's talking about. That means your most precious begotten son. Not Ishmael. Ishmael was his oldest son. He's 14 years older than Isaac. But they broke the promise of God by having Ishmael outside of the bounds of marriage. So God promised Abraham and Sarah that they were going to have a child, They got impatient, so she presented her slave girl, Hagar, to Abraham and said, I know you're 90-something years old, but here's my 15-year-old slave girl. Why don't you continue the line through her? And of course, Abraham's like, all right, sure. He shouldn't have listened to her advice, and he should not have allowed his flesh to get in the way of that. Because 14 years later, bam, there's Isaac. And Isaac was the son of the promise. So according to God, Isaac is the son, the only son. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's why we underline that. Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, for God so loved, okay, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Do we know what sits on top of Mount Moriah today? The Temple Mount.
Oh.
Where the temples are in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, right now there's no temple. There's a mosque. There's the there's the Golden Dome, Dome of the Rock. Do you know what's inside of that Dome of the Rock?
The remains of the temple.
A rock is inside of the Dome of the Rock that they believe was the rock that Abraham laid Isaac to sacrifice. That's Mount Moriah, okay? Jesus was not sacrificed on Mount Moriah because Mount Moriah is in the city, but he was crucified outside of the city, looking at the city. So he's on another hill across the valley, looking back at the city, but he's still in the region of Moriah. Okay, Jesus was crucified in the region of Moriah. Okay, but he was declared guilty in the city at the Bema seat of Pontius Pilate. So he was in the city when he was found guilty, taken out of the city, that they call it the Via della Rosa, the Catholics do, and he was then crucified outside of the city, okay, which is a fulfillment of prophecy as well. Let's continue here. Take your son, your only son whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there. For God so loved the world that he gave. For God so loved the world that he offered his son, okay? Offer him there as a burnt offering. Something about fire. Hold that thought for a second, okay? You're going to burn your son Isaac as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning. What time was Jesus taken to face Pilate? Early in the morning, 6 a.m., basically, as soon as the sun came up, and saddled his donkey, just like Jesus rode into the city on Palm Sunday on the donkey's foal, okay? And took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering. Oh, it gets better. Was Jesus on wood? Yeah, the cross was made out of wood for the burnt offering. And arose and went to the place in which God had told him. Verse 4 now, read it with me. On the third day. Now, here's what I want us to understand. When God told, could have been Jesus, when God told Abraham, take your son and kill him, at that moment, Abraham considered Isaac to be dead. At that moment. Okay? He also believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. He knew that God, even if he were to kill Isaac, he knew that God could do what with Isaac?
Bring him back.
He knew he'd bring him back from the dead because he believed God. So he was willing to sacrifice his son because he knew that God would raise him from the dead. Why? Because God gave him a promise. This promise is going to be a multi-nation promise. All of these, the Messiah is going to come through you, right? And through your family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the others, right? So he believed that. So in his mind, he reasoned, okay, he's dead. We're traveling together. It's 3 days to get there, okay? 3 days and then a resurrection, right? Okay, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes, saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will what? Worship and return to you.
Really, he knew he was coming back.
He knew, even if he killed him, he knew that he was going to rise from the dead, metaphorically speaking. He knew, okay? If I get through with this, and he had every expectation that he was going to kill his son, because God told him to, okay? He knew that God would raise his son, that there would be a third day resurrection. Is the hair going up on the back of your neck yet? Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, like the cross was laid across the back of Jesus. Okay? And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. The knife represents the piercing of Jesus when he was nailed to the cross. The fire, though, represents the hell and torment that Jesus experienced on the cross. Okay? The hell that Jesus experienced so that we would not experience it. He took it upon himself, just like Isaac was about to. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, by the way, I want to say something here. Many people, I believe, falsely assume that Isaac was a young boy when all of this was going on. So they'll read it like this. My father, here I am, son.
Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the sacrifice?
Right? That's how people want to read this. I don't believe that he was a young boy. I believe he was at least the age of Jesus when Jesus went to the cross. I believe he was the age of a soldier, 33 years old. Right? How do we know this? Because in the very next chapter, he's getting married.
Right.
He's an adult. He's not a young kid. Okay? So I believe that this is almost a spitting image of the Jesus narrative of Jesus going to the cross. This is foreshadowing. This is what you call a type of what's going to happen. Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood. But what? What's it say? Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Now, I don't know Hebrew, and I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I know how to render this passage, okay? Abraham said God will provide for himself the lamb. Take out the word for and read that. God will provide himself the lamb. God will provide himself as the lamb. That's another rendering in Hebrew. Actually, that's probably the better rendering. God will provide himself as the lamb. Right?
See, that's what mine says.
Yeah? Is that what yours says? God will provide himself as the lamb?
There's no for there.
Yeah, there's no for. God will provide himself. Yeah. But you can read that two ways, can't you? Oh, God will provide the lamb. Literally, he'll bring a lamb and whatever, which is actually what he did. But 2,000 years later, God did provide himself as the lamb. Right? So you see all this? God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. Oh, it gets better. This is where it really gets better. Then they came to the place in which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there, arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac, an adult son in all likelihood, humbly, as a servant, laid on that wood at his father's request.
Isaac gave himself, he didn't fight it.
Without a fight. He could have stopped it. He was big enough. It wasn't just some little kid that his father wrestled and put there. Quit scrumming, right? He didn't do that. He put himself on that wood. He allowed his father to put him on that wood. Okay? And he did it humbly and as a servant. On top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. But the who? Angel of the Lord. Who's this person? Well, let's see. Called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God. Okay, so who is this angel of the Lord? Is he an angel? Or is he a Christophanic appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament? Here's how we know that he's God. The angel of the Lord is God here. Okay? Here's how we know. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me.
Right.
Wow. But it gets better. So Jesus ultimately would be sacrificed, but Isaac wasn't sacrificed, but something was sacrificed instead of Isaac. Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram. What's a ram?
A sheep.
A perfect male lamb. Perfect is a ram. Jesus was a male ram. He was a lamb, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, but he was a perfect male. He was a ram, okay? And Abraham the ram was caught in the thicket. What is a thicket?
Thorn sheep.
It's a thorn bush.
Round his head.
What was he caught by? His hindquarters? No, his horns. If you know rams, when they have the horns, they're called a crown. This ram had his crown caught in the thorns. Crown of thorns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. That's substitutionary atonement right there. All the way back in Genesis 14.
Right.
Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. And 2,000 years later he did. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. This is definitely what Abram saw. He saw that in Genesis 22 and rejoiced because he saw Genesis 3:15 come to fruition. Everything that he learned from Shem, who learned it from Methuselah, who learned it from Adam, about the promise made at the first proto-evangelium, everything, he rejoiced because he saw it. He saw it and he was a participant of it. Can we say this now? So is Jesus in the Old Testament? You better believe he's in the Old Testament. We're just getting started here.